Sony, you just keep putting out cameras. It's like the Brady Bunch times a million now. Every week they're like, I'll put out another camera. So let's talk about their latest camera, and that is the Sony FX3. And in this video, I'm gonna be comparing the FX3, the FX6, and the FX9, looking at how these cameras differ, mainly what the image quality is between all of them and which one might be best for you. It's come to my attention that some of you are very upset, like unreasonably upset, that I never mentioned the A7S III in my first review about the FX3.
Talk about the A7S III.
I'm aware that it is the same camera, essentially, as the FX3, but I've never shot with it, so I'm not gonna talk about it. If you use the A7S III, super happy for you. It's a great camera. But today, I'm looking at the cinema line that Sony has and the difference between all these cameras. But specs don't matter with your camera. What you're shooting matters. You can shoot a cool film on an iPhone. So when you're looking at these camera reviews, no matter what anyone says, the question is, does the camera work for you? Let's look at the images right now. We have the FX3, the FX6, and the FX9, kind of all of the cinema cameras in Sony cinema line besides the Venice. I don't have a Venice, never shot on the Venice, I would like to. But the first thing I notice when I look at all these images is two main factors, is the skin tone and the sharpness. And I'll say this, that the FX3 was noticeably sharper than compared to the FX6 and the FX9. And that's interesting to me because the FX3 and the FX6 actually have the exact same sensor. It's only the FX9 that has a different sensor. It's the larger 6K sensor. But this doesn't necessarily mean that's a better thing, because I actually found that the FX6 and especially the FX9 had more of that filmic look to them. They weren't overly sharp, but it has more of that filmic roll off, something closer to the Alexa. It's a really beautiful skin tone. I really quite liked it. And then speaking of skin tones, the biggest difference I noticed was the FX3 had more of that kind of more orangey punch to it. The skin tones felt more saturated. And every one of these shots has the same LUT applied and the same white balance. It's my MB Sony Cinema LUT that we apply to each one. So these skin tone shifts are just inherent to the sensor. And so looking at the skin tones right away with the FX3, you can see that there's a bit more of that punch to it. The FX6 to me, looking at the images, I don't know, the FX6 is just kind of down the middle. It's not bad, it's not any drastic, it's really usable. I think I look exactly the way I look, which is pale in the winter. But really looking at each image, they all look great. I'm just getting nitpicky. If you had to choose one, I'd still probably go with the FX9, but honestly, the FX6 and the FX3 are amazing B cameras to the old faithful FX9. And of course, you can balance and match all these images. As you can see here, I've color corrected the images so they look pretty much the same, added a bit more saturation into the skin tones on the FX9, brought it down a little bit on the FX3, and they all look the same. You really can match these quite easily. As you can see, they're balanced. I thought it'd be fun too for you guys to try to guess which cameras are which. You can go over to my Instagram, I'll put the link below. I have a post there. Whoever guesses which camera is which in the right order, you'll get to win a Super Peer call with me, which Super Peer is my film consulting thing if you want to talk about your films. Maybe you're looking at that saying that's a terrible prize. You don't want to have to talk with me for half an hour. Or you just get on the call and complain about that. Or we can talk about whatever you want. I don't know, politics, Call of Duty. Play Call of Duty for that half an hour. Moving on to the next point. Like I mentioned, the FX3 and the FX6, this is the FX6, they both have the same sensor, and there's about a $2,000 price difference. And mainly what you're getting in that price difference is this one thing right down here, and that is Timecode, TC. For some people, you may never care about this. If you shoot films by yourself, you never have external sound, you're never syncing two cameras together, timecode may not be a concern for you. But if you're ever shooting in a professional environment where there's more than one camera and an external sound recordist, timecode is almost immediately absolutely a necessity. This was kind of the most disappointing thing for me with the FX3 is that if you put cinema line on a camera, it really should have timecode or at least some sort of hybrid timecode slot, because I understand that SDI ports take up a lot of real estate, especially on a small camera body. But for you, if you're trying to debate between an A7S III or the A1 or any of these types of mirrorless cameras and an FX3, I would say ask yourself, do you take photos and do you care about audio? Because the FX3 has the XLR ports on the top handle, which allows you to take in professional audio. Like right now, I'm using a professional Sennheiser microphone, but I'm having to work through some crazy, this thing. If I was shooting on an FX3, which I'm not on A7, I wouldn't need that. Hey man. Oh, hey man. Do you mind doing a sponsorship for today's video? How much do I get? 100 bucks? Well, I can be bought for nothing. Today's sponsor is The Art of Documentary, which is me. It's us. It's our documentary course. If you're not familiar with this, it's the complete guide to creating compelling films. I started this documentary course because I saw that there was nothing like it out there that takes you from finding a documentary idea, developing that story, to shooting it, to editing it, to actually getting it into film festivals. We launched this course back in September and we had almost 500 students. It was so fun. We've seen so many people release their first films, get them into film festivals, and take huge steps in their career as filmmakers. This is an intensive course. There's over 50 videos. You also have the option to be part of our group coaching calls. We call it the AOD family. There's a Facebook group. Get to share your films and get feedback and grow as a filmmaker. We are relaunching this on March 8th. We're gonna be having huge discounts when we relaunch, so you're gonna wanna get on the wait list and be a part of that. Last time we had so many people joining that we had to close the doors, so you wanna make sure to get on that wait list. Go check it out, The Art of Documentary. Now let's get back to our video. Talking about sensor size with the FX3 while I hold an FX9 is quite fascinating to me because it is full frame, and I hear a lot of people being like, oh, you don't need full frame, they shot S35 on film. Yeah, cool, but we're talking pixels right now, not film. And a full frame sensor will always give you better low light, and this is because the pixels are bigger, and when you have a bigger pixel, you can gather more light. So FX3 full frame, just like all the Sony cameras in their cinema line, have the full frame, so there is more space. And what's even more interesting about that FX3 sensor, which is the same with the FX6, is that they have half the amount of pixels as the FX9, which means each pixel is bigger. And you might be thinking that's a bad thing that there's less pixels, but it's actually amazing for low light. This is why the FX3 is so incredible. It has 400,000 ISO, which gets a bit gnarly and kind of unusable. But at 12,000 ISO, it was so clean. When I was filming Julian here in the boxing gym, it was just clean at 12,000. I barely used lights. My lights were all at like 3% power, which meant I could use them for like 9 hours. It just really opens a lot of doors. Having that bigger sensor with less pixels really helps you as a filmmaker. And that's why if you're not a photographer and you're debating between the A1 or the A7S III or A3 or whatever, I don't know why you wouldn't get the FX3, because it still takes stills. They're only 12 megapixels, but if you're not blowing up your images, you don't need anything more. You want a big sensor with a good amount of pixels for 4K, but you don't need 54 megapixels if you're shooting video, because you have tighter pixels and more noise then. And in turn, worse low light performance. So if you're a still shooter, buy the A7S III. But if you're a filmmaker and you wanna make videos, I would say hands down, go for the FX3. Another cool thing that I learned with the FX3 is that it has a CMOS BSI sensor, and that means backside illuminated sensor, which means that all the circuitry is on like the backside of the sensor. This is an iPhone, but if this was the sensor, all the circuitry would be right here. And why that's good is it means there's less space being taken up on the sensor, so there is more space again for each pixel to gather light. You get better low light performance, but then also too, you get a faster sensor so that there's less rolling shutter. You can see these crazy shots with Julian here. There is still a little bit of rolling shutter, but not much as I whip the camera back and forth. It's quite impressive. The FX3 actually has less rolling shutter than the FX9. And speaking about the FX9, this poor guy is just getting beat down by the FX6 and the FX3. I just gotta have a little bit of a whining moment here. The FX9, I feel so bad for my FX9. It's just not fun when you're trying to shoot slow-mo. If you're shooting full frame on the 4K, you gotta go into 6 menus to change it to cropped 5K, so you're losing 17% of your image size so that you can actually get to 60 frames at 4K. It just goes on and on, where if I'm shooting on the FX6 or the FX3, I can quickly jump between 60 frames all the way up to 120 frames, 4K, no crop, just like that on the touch of a touchscreen. But poor old FX9, you gotta go through a labyrinth of menus just to be able to shoot 60 frames at not even full frame, it's 5K full frame crop. It's strange to me why Sony did this. I really hope they improve it, or else I don't know why you would buy the FX9 over the FX6. Now, one of the biggest factors that's different between the FX6 and the FX3, as well as the FX9, is this. The variable ND that is in both of these cameras is not included on the FX3. You're always gonna have to, so much gear, use a variable ND on the front of your FX3 in order to be able to control the light that's coming in. Now that said, it does have the 5-axis image stabilization and also records the gyro metadata, so you can take it into Catalyst Browse. I put a video up like a year ago about this, which is Sony's really cool stabilization software, and you can do some amazing stuff. You pretty much don't need a gimbal if you have an FX3 between the image stabilization that's happening in camera and what you can do in post. It's very, very impressive. And then if you had a lens that also had internal image stabilization, it's just like the most stable shot ever. You're a human tripod. And finally too, talking about codec, all 3 cameras shoot 422 internally with 10-bit in the XAVC HD codec. Now the FX3 also shoots in XAVC HS, I believe. Now that codec, I'll warn you, crashes Premiere a lot. It's even crashed my iMac just straight up. If you're gonna be editing FX3 footage, I would recommend encoding it, at least if you're on a Mac, into ProRes. That's been our experience so far. Premiere and this new file structure or actual codec, they just don't seem to like each other. So that's interesting. I hope there will come a day when Sony puts ProRes inside their cameras. ProRes is just so easy to work with, and it would be amazing if the FX9 ever had 444 internally. I'm gonna start venting about that. That's just so strange that you have like a $12,000 camera that doesn't have 444, that you gotta add on everything to the back of it, which is okay if you're shooting the FX3 for that price point. I think 422 10-bit at the, I think it's like 500 megabits or whatever per second. It's great. It's a very strong codec for something that is so small. I know Blackmagic has their cameras that shoot B-RAW, but honestly for me, 422 does the trick for most things. I would just love to see, for those times that you need it, having 4x4 internally in something like the FX9. So you're getting into filmmaking, like I said, use the FX3. If you need timecode or you're ever going to be needing to sync stuff, this is where you want to think about the FX6. To me, this is still like, this is like the perfect all-around cinema camera. Sony really crushed it on this. The FX9, if you're shooting real time, you don't really need to go over to slow motion, and you wear an easy rig because this is heavier. This is the camera. We shot all of our stuff for Clear Sky, our film, on this camera because most of Clear Sky is 24 frames per second. So this is the perfect camera for that. But man, it just feels like Sony keeps cannibalizing this camera and making it more and more redundant with every new camera they put out, because the slow motion and the menu system on that poor FX9 is getting very antiquated. But ultimately, I do love this camera and I love the images coming off of it. We just released our new film, Battleground, which was shot entirely on the FX9. Thank you guys. This is a very extensive review. Appreciate you watching all of it. Leave any questions or comments below. I'm getting a text message from my Uber Eats guy telling me food is here. So I gotta go. I'll see you guys on the next one.